The biting November wind whipped around Eleanor, stinging her eyes, though she couldn't tell if the wetness on her cheeks was from the cold or the ceaseless flow of her tears. 42 years. 42 years of laughter, arguments, quiet companionship, and unwavering love, all now reduced to a cold marble slab inscribed with Arthur's name. At 65, Eleanor felt an emptiness so profound it threatened to swallow her whole, a physical ache that resonated with the barren branches swaying overhead in the cemetery. She stood alone, a solitary figure draped in black, long after the last mourner had departed, glued to the raw earth that held her heart. A gentle hand touched her arm, pulling her back from the precipice of her grief. "Mother, it's getting dreadfully cold. You'll catch your death out here." Genevieve's voice was soft, laced with concern, a stark contrast to Eleanor's disheveled sorrow. Her daughter-in-law, 38, stood beside her, a vision of composed elegance in a tailored black suit, her blonde hair impeccably styled, not a strand out of place. Genevieve had been a rock through the funeral arrangements, her efficiency and steady presence a balm to Eleanor's shattered state. Eleanor merely nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She allowed Genevieve to guide her, her steps heavy, each one an effort against the crushing weight of her loss. Just as they reached the edge of the gravesite, a harsh, unexpected buzz ripped through the somber silence. Eleanor's ancient flip phone, usually tucked away and forgotten, vibrated with an unfamiliar urgency. An unknown number. Who would be calling now? With a sigh, she fumbled to answer, her movements slow and clumsy. "Hello," she managed, her voice hoarse. A raspy, older female voice crackled through the receiver, urgent and breathless. "Don't go home tonight." Eleanor frowned, pulling the phone away from her ear slightly. "I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong number," she mumbled, glancing at Genevieve, who was already reaching for her car keys. "No, I don't," the voice insisted, a sharp edge to her tone that cut through Eleanor's grief-induced haze. "Please, just listen. For your own safety," Eleanor scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. Her own safety? What nonsense. She was a widow, not some spy in a thriller. She snapped the phone shut, dismissing it as a prank call or a genuinely mistaken number, but a prickle of unease, sharp and unwelcome, began to burrow beneath her skin. The urgency in that voice had been unnervingly real. As they walked across the dew-kissed grass toward Genevieve's sleek, dark sedan, the phone vibrated again. The same unknown number. Eleanor hesitated, her heart giving a strange, irregular thump against her ribs. Genevieve, noticing her pause, offered a small, sympathetic smile. "Everything all right, Mother?" Eleanor ignored her, pressing the phone to her ear once more. "Look, whoever this is, I'm at my husband's funeral. This isn't funny." "Genevieve is not who you think she is," the voice hissed, lower this time, almost a whisper, yet it sounded impossibly loud in Eleanor's ear. "Do not be alone with her. Not tonight, not ever." Eleanor's breath hitched. She stopped dead, the cold seeping into her bones more acutely than before. Her heart, already heavy with sorrow, now began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This wasn't a wrong number. This was personal. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, clutching the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. Genevieve, a few steps ahead, turned back, her brow furrowed with mild concern. "She's dangerous. She's been planning this for months," the voice continued, unwavering, relentless. "She killed Arthur. And you're next." The line went dead. Eleanor stared at the black screen of her phone, her mind reeling, struggling to process the heinous accusation. Killed Arthur? It was impossible. Arthur had died in his sleep. A massive heart attack. The doctor had confirmed it. Genevieve had been beside her, sobbing, offering condolences, and staying up late to organize the house. She had been nothing but a caring support. Benjamin's wife, her beloved son's wife. How could she possibly? Genevieve was by her side again, her hand gently resting on Eleanor's arm. "Mother, you look terribly pale. What happened? Who was that?" Her eyes, usually a sparkling blue, seemed to hold an unreadable depth, though Eleanor quickly dismissed the thought as grief, playing tricks on her mind. Are you sure you wouldn't prefer to come stay with Benjamin and me tonight? You shouldn't be alone. Not tonight. Not after everything. Eleanor blinked, trying to dispel the chilling words still echoing in her head. She glanced from Genevieve's seemingly solicitous face to the gleaming black car. It was a new model, a luxury brand Eleanor recognized from advertisements. A flicker of unease, faint but persistent, stirred within her. Genevieve and Benjamin had often complained about their financial struggles, lamenting the cost of their modest home and Benjamin's slow career progression. Yet, here was this expensive vehicle. Just as Genevieve reached out to open the passenger door for her, Eleanor's phone vibrated again, a short, sharp burst. Not a call, a text message. She fumbled with the device, her fingers suddenly clumsy. A single, terrifying sentence appeared on the screen, sent from the same unknown number. She drugged his coffee every morning for 3 weeks. Check his pill organizer. She switched his heart medication with sugar pills. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The words were a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably, a violent tremor that shook her entire frame. She lifted her gaze, meeting Genevieve's eye for a fleeting moment. A strange, cold glint seemed to flash in those blue depths, gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same comforting smile. Without thinking, her thumb flew across the screen, deleting the message, eradicating the horrifying accusation, as if its disappearance could also erase the terror it had invoked. Genevieve had already settled into the driver's seat and started the engine. The low hum of the luxury car a stark contrast to the frantic pounding in Eleanor's chest. "So, staying with us then?" Genevieve asked, her voice light, yet with an underlying tone of quiet expectation. Eleanor shook her head, clutching her purse tightly in her lap. No thank you, dear. I just want to go home. To my own bed." She forced a smile, praying it didn't look as brittle as it felt. The cold glance, or what she perceived as one, returned to Genevieve's eyes for a fraction of a second, quickly masked by a deeper, almost insistent push. "Are you certain, Mother? It's no trouble at all. We insist. Benjamin would want you with us tonight." The insistence in Genevieve's voice had intensified, morphing from polite offer to something that bordered on a demand. Eleanor's heart leaped. She swallowed hard, her mind racing, a terrifying new thought solidifying in her mind. What if the caller wasn't crazy? What if Genevieve's insistence wasn't kindness, but something far more sinister? The silence in the car was thick, punctuated only by the hum of the engine and the frantic thrum of Eleanor's own heartbeat. "I need to go home, Genevieve," Eleanor repeated, her voice firmer this time, an edge of desperation she hoped wasn't audible. "I need to be in my own house, surrounded by Arthur's things. I can't stay anywhere else tonight." The thought of being in someone else's space, away from the familiar scent of Arthur's pipe tobacco and the worn armchair where he read his newspapers, was unbearable. It was the only comfort she could grasp, a fragile anchor in the storm of her grief. Genevieve sighed, a soft, almost imperceptible sound that still managed to convey a hint of exasperation. "Very well, Mother, but I absolutely will not leave you alone tonight. I won't take no for an answer on that." Her tone, though still polite, had hardened, revealing a steel beneath the velvet. It wasn't an offer anymore. It was a directive. Eleanor's stomach clenched. She nodded, knowing argument would be futile, and frankly, a part of her was terrified to be truly alone now. Just then, her phone vibrated again, a relentless summons from the unknown number. Eleanor jumped, her nerves stretched taut. She glanced at the screen, then quickly tucked the phone back into her purse. "Just a telemarketer, I suppose," she muttered, forcing a small, dismissive laugh. She couldn't answer it now, not with Genevieve sitting inches away, her presence suddenly feeling suffocating. As Genevieve navigated the familiar streets towards Eleanor's quiet suburban home, Eleanor studied her daughter-in-law's profile. The perfect blonde hair, the composed expression, the hands gripping the steering wheel with an almost too relaxed grace. But beneath the veneer of concern, Eleanor started to perceive a subtle shift, a calculated hardness in the set of Genevieve's jaw, a flicker in her eyes when she thought Eleanor wasn't looking. The woman beside her, once a source of comfort, now seemed an enigma. A beautiful mask. Eleanor was terrified to look behind. They pulled into the driveway, the crunch of tires on gravel loud in the evening quiet. Before Eleanor could even reach for her seatbelt, Genevieve was already unbuckling hers. "Let me just get the door, Mother," she said, her voice brisk. "And I'll lock up for the night. You can never be too careful these days." Eleanor watched, a growing knot of apprehension in her chest, as Genevieve strode purposefully to the front door. Her daughter-in-law produced a set of keys Eleanor didn't recognize, unlocking the deadbolt with practiced ease. But it was what came next that truly sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. Genevieve then reached inside, sliding a heavy-duty chain lock into place, a lock Eleanor was certain had never been on her door. Arthur had been meticulous about home security, and he would never have installed such a thing without telling her. Where had it come from? And why was Genevieve locking them in? Inside the familiar warmth of her home, Eleanor felt a chill she couldn't attribute to the weather. Genevieve moved with a strange familiarity through the kitchen, a space Eleanor herself often struggled to navigate efficiently anymore. "Let's get you some tea, Mother," she announced, her voice cheerful, almost too bright. "You look utterly drained." She went directly to the rarely used cupboard above the stove, pulling out a delicate ceramic tea kettle Eleanor hadn't seen in months. Then, with an uncanny precision, she reached into a hidden corner of the pantry, retrieving a small, half-empty jar of local honey. Eleanor had tucked it there, almost forgotten, after a brief cold several months ago. Eleanor sank onto a kitchen chair, suddenly feeling utterly exhausted, every muscle in her body aching. She watched Genevieve, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. As Genevieve busied herself, Eleanor caught her eye. Genevieve was watching her, a faint, almost imperceptible curve to her lips, an unnerving look of satisfaction that made Eleanor's blood run cold. "How did you know where I kept the honey, dear?" Eleanor asked, her voice a little breathy, trying to sound casual, but the words felt strained. Genevieve turned, the kettle now on the stove, beginning to heat. "Oh, Benjamin mentioned it once," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "He said Arthur always liked a little honey in his coffee. So thoughtful of him. Arthur liked honey in his coffee." Eleanor's mind snagged on the detail. Arthur. Diabetic. Strictly controlled sugar intake for years. The only time he'd had honey was during that bout of cold. And even then, he'd used a sugar substitute for his coffee. Benjamin knew this. Everyone knew this. A tiny, insidious seed of doubt began to sprout in Eleanor's mind, watered by the cold dread blooming in her chest. Her phone buzzed again, a silent vibration in her purse. This time, she knew it was the unknown number. She fumbled for it, pulling it out discreetly, keeping it low beneath the edge of the table. Another text. Her heart hammered. "Look in Arthur's pill organizer. Top shelf of bathroom medicine cabinet. Check the pills against the prescription labels. Do it now while she's distracted." Just as Eleanor was about to absorb the message, Genevieve moved closer, her movements silent on the linoleum floor. "Is everything all right, Mother? You keep looking at your phone." Her voice was soft, but her eyes, those unsettling blue eyes, seemed to bore into Eleanor's very soul. Eleanor quickly tucked the phone away again, forcing a shaky smile. "Oh, yes, dear. Just the funeral home," confirming the floral arrangements were satisfactory. "They're very particular." It was a clumsy lie, but it bought her a few precious seconds. At that moment, the kettle on the stove began to whistle, a piercing shriek that made them both jump. Genevieve turned instantly, her attention diverted to the task of preparing the tea. This was her chance. Eleanor snatched her phone, her fingers trembling as she brought up the unread part of the text. The words, when they registered, made her blood run cold, chilling her to the bone. "She's been slowly poisoning him for weeks. Heart medication replaced with lactose pills. Coffee laced with Digitalis makes heart failure look natural. You're next. Get out of there now." Eleanor's vision blurred, the kitchen swimming before her eyes. Digitalis? Sugar pills? The sheer, horrifying possibility of it all was too much. Her Arthur, poisoned, slowly, deliberately. And then the final, terrifying sentence, "You're next. Get out of there now." But how? Genevieve was in the kitchen, calm, composed, humming softly as she poured boiling water into 2 delicate teacups. Eleanor watched, her breath shallow and ragged, as Genevieve carefully, almost meticulously, added a generous spoonful of the previously forgotten honey to only one of the cups. Her cup. "Here we are, Mother," Genevieve said, turning with a saccharine smile, extending the cup. "Chamomile with honey, just like Arthur used to make for you." The teacup, with its inviting curl of steam, felt like a poisoned chalice in Eleanor's trembling hand. "Chamomile with honey, just like Arthur used to make for you." The words echoed. A sinister refrain. But Arthur never made her tea with honey. His diabetes had instilled in him a meticulous aversion to all unnecessary sugars. He was, if anything, a stickler for black coffee and plain tea. The lie, so casual, so seemingly innocuous, now solidified into a terrifying beacon in the storm of Eleanor's confusion. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. She needed time, needed to verify the chilling accusation from the anonymous caller. Her mind raced, grasping for an excuse. "It looks wonderful, but I think I just need to use the bathroom first. All that driving." Genevieve's smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Eleanor rose, her legs feeling like jelly, and walked as calmly as she could towards the small bathroom off the hallway. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, she spun around, her hands flying to the medicine cabinet. She fumbled with the latch, her fingers clumsy with urgency, and pulled open the mirrored door. There it was, exactly as the text message had described. Arthur's pill organizer, a neatly labeled plastic box with compartments for each day of the week, morning and evening doses. She snatched it down, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes immediately fixated on the pills inside. Arthur's heart medication was small, oblong, and distinctly white, with a faint score line down the middle. These were different. Round, smooth, a pale cream color. Her heart sank, a sickening plunge into icy dread. With shaking hands, Eleanor reached for the small, amber-colored prescription bottle beside the organizer, the one that held Arthur's emergency nitrates and the few remaining real heart pills from his last refill. She poured a few onto her palm, comparing them to the smooth, round tablets in the organizer. There was no doubt. These were not his pills, not the life-saving medication that was meant to keep his frail heart beating. Every single compartment, for every day of the week, was filled with what looked exactly like the generic lactose tablets she sometimes took for an upset stomach. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Arthur hadn't died of a heart attack. He had been slowly, methodically poisoned, his vital medication replaced with inert sugar pills, leaving him vulnerable, defenseless. And she, Eleanor, his wife of 42 years, had been oblivious. Her Arthur, gone, murdered right under her nose, in her own home. The grief she felt before was a dull ache. This was a searing, agonizing pain, compounded by a terrifying, blossoming rage. A soft tap on the bathroom door jolted her, making her jump. "Eleanor, are you feeling all right in there? You've been gone for quite a while." Genevieve's voice, muffled but clear, sent a fresh wave of panic through her. Eleanor frantically stuffed the pill organizer back onto the top shelf, shoving it behind a bottle of antiseptic. She grabbed the prescription bottle, hid it behind a stack of towels, and then, remembering to maintain the illusion, flushed the toilet with a loud clang. "Yes, dear, just fine," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady, to erase the tremor that threatened to betray her. She opened the door, forcing a weak smile. Genevieve was standing right there, closer than Eleanor expected, her figure filling the narrow hallway. Her smile, fixed and polite, seemed to stop just short of her eyes, which held an unnerving, calculating gleam. "Good. Your tea's getting cold." Back in the kitchen, Eleanor slid back into her chair. The cup of tea was still steaming gently on the table, the distinct scent of chamomile and a cloying sweetness from the honey assaulting her senses. She picked it up, her hands still trembling, and brought it to her lips. The taste was bitter, metallic beneath the honey, leaving a foul residue on her tongue. It was all she could do not to gag. "It's delicious, dear. Thank you," she said, managing a small fake sip. "But maybe a little too hot still. I'll just let it cool for a moment." She placed the cup back down, her gaze sweeping subtly across Genevieve. That's when she noticed them. Thin, almost invisible against her skin, flesh-colored latex gloves. Genevieve wore them not just on her hands, but extending up her wrists. When had she put those on? Eleanor hadn't seen them before. Not at the cemetery. Not in the car. They were a professional's tool, meant to leave no trace. Her phone buzzed again, vibrating silently in her lap. Eleanor's heart leaped. She glanced down. Another call from the unknown number. Genevieve, quick as a viper, made a sudden lunge towards her, her hand darting out, clearly aiming for the phone. But Eleanor, adrenaline surging through her veins, was faster. She instinctively pulled it away, holding it protectively against her chest. Genevieve froze, her eyes widening for a fleeting second before her composure snapped back into place. "Who is that, Mother?" she asked, her voice laced with a dangerous curiosity. She had seen the caller ID. "Clara?" "Who's Clara?" "Oh, just an old friend," Eleanor mumbled, her voice strained. She declined the call, letting it go to voicemail, her mind racing. An old friend? She didn't have a friend named Clara. That was the anonymous caller's contact name. Genevieve's mask, which had been so perfectly maintained, slipped just then. For a terrifying, crystal-clear moment, the eyes that looked back at Eleanor were not filled with gentle concern, but with a cold, calculating intensity that spoke of pure, unadulterated malice. Eleanor was truly trapped. The air in the kitchen crackled with an unspoken menace. Genevieve's eyes, devoid of any pretense of warmth, fixed on Eleanor. "Eleanor," she began, her voice dropping to a low, chilling command that sent shivers down Eleanor's spine. "I think you should drink your tea now." The words hung heavy in the silence, a steel trap snapping shut around Eleanor. She noticed, with a fresh wave of panic, that Genevieve had subtly shifted her position, now standing between Eleanor and the kitchen exit, effectively blocking her escape. Eleanor's hand, still clutching the hot mug, trembled. The metallic taste from the earlier feigned sip still coated her tongue. The honey-laced tea, once an innocent offering, now represented a clear and present danger. She pushed the mug away, a decisive, clattering sound against the worn formica countertop. "No. I'm not really thirsty anymore," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, considering the terror spiraling within her. Genevieve's smile became a razor-thin line, devoid of mirth, a predatory baring of teeth. "Oh, but you must, Mother. Arthur would want you to take care of yourself. He always said you neglected your health." Her words were honeyed, but her eyes were flint. The charade was wearing thin. Eleanor's own anger, cold and sharp, began to push through the fear. Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the tense silence. "How long have you been planning this?" "The pills. Arthur's medication. How long have you been replacing them?" The words tumbled out, propelled by a desperate need for the truth, no matter how horrifying. A beat of silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken malice. Then, a subtle shift in Genevieve's posture, a slight relaxation of her shoulders. The last vestiges of her facade crumbled, revealing the hardened core beneath. Her smile vanished completely, replaced by an expression of cold calculation. 6 weeks, she admitted, her voice flat, utterly devoid of any warmth or remorse. He was starting to get suspicious. You know, more observant than I gave him credit for, kept asking why his new pills tasted so sweet. She even managed a slight shrug, as if discussing the weather. Eleanor felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. 6 weeks. For 6 weeks, her husband had been slowly, cruelly betrayed by the woman he trusted. The woman who called herself his daughter. "Why?" Eleanor whispered, the single word torn from her throat. Genevieve let out a short, bitter laugh that filled the quiet kitchen, echoing off the familiar walls. "Why do you think, Eleanor?" "Money. It's always about money, isn't it?" Her eyes, usually so composed, now blazed with a raw, desperate avarice. My real estate business? It's gone. Bankrupt. Benjamin's salary, bless his naive heart, barely covers the interest on our debt. We're living on fumes, keeping up appearances, while you two were sitting on a gold mine. Eleanor stared, dumbfounded. But the inheritance isn't yours. It's Benjamin's. And mine, of course. Genevieve scoffed, a sneer twisting her lips. Oh, darling, you really are quaint. Arthur, in his infinite wisdom, made me a secondary beneficiary to his life insurance policies. A significant portion, actually, enough to clear our debts, and then some. Once you're gone. She let the sentence hang in the air, a chilling implication that needed no further elaboration. Eleanor's world spun. The kitchen, the teacup, Genevieve's face. Everything blurred around the edges. She gripped the table, trying to ground herself. Benjamin? She gasped, the name a desperate plea. Does Benjamin know? Does he know what you've done? Genevieve's expression, for the first time, softened, a flicker of something akin to genuine emotion crossing her features. But it wasn't remorse. It was something protective. Benjamin doesn't know anything, she stated, her voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. He thinks his father died of natural causes. A massive heart attack, just like the doctor said. He loved his father, Eleanor. He would never understand, and he never will. As she spoke, Genevieve reached into the deep pocket of her tailored black blazer. She withdrew a small, clear glass vial, no larger than her thumb, filled with a colorless, viscous liquid. She held it up, almost admiringly. This, Eleanor, is Digitalis, derived from the foxglove plant. A potent cardiac glycoside. When administered in small, consistent doses, it mimics the symptoms of heart failure. And the beauty of it, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, a chilling tone of detached scientific explanation, is that it's virtually undetectable in post-mortem toxicological tests, especially if it's been building up in the system for weeks. Eleanor felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead. Her own heart gave a strange, painful flutter. My irregular heartbeats, she whispered, a dawning horror gripping her. Just last week, she'd felt several episodes of palpitations, dismissible at the time as stress. But now, Genevieve's smile returned, triumphant and cruel. Yes, well. A little something to make sure you were susceptible. We needed to ensure a natural progression, didn't we? Can't have any loose ends. At that terrifying moment, Eleanor's phone vibrated again, a jarring buzz on the quiet countertop where she had placed it. The screen lit up, displaying the name Clara. Genevieve's face, which had been so composed in its malevolence, suddenly went stark white. Her eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear finally piercing her cold exterior. What did she tell you? She demanded, her voice sharp, her composure fracturing. Eleanor seized the opportunity, her mind racing, a desperate gamble. She's been calling all day, Genevieve, Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly strong, belying the terror that gripped her, warning me about you, telling me you switched Arthur's pills, telling me I'm next. The tension in the kitchen was thick enough to choke on. If you've been gripped by this unfolding drama, don't miss a single twist. Hit that like button, share this story with everyone you know, and make sure you subscribe so you can follow Eleanor's journey to its incredible conclusion. Genevieve's face was ashen, her composure shattered. Her eyes, wide with a terror that finally matched Eleanor's own, darted to the phone, still clutched in Eleanor's hand. It can't be her, she muttered, her voice barely a whisper, a frantic, desperate denial. She's supposed to be in Florida. Who, Genevieve? Eleanor demanded, her voice regaining some strength, fueled by a mixture of fear and burgeoning hope. Who is Clara? But Genevieve ignored her. With a sudden, desperate lunge, she snatched the phone from Eleanor's grasp. Her thumb fumbled for the answer button, and then, with a sharp intake of breath, she slammed it onto speakerphone, holding it out between them like a weapon. Hello, Genevieve? Clara's raspy voice cut through the silence. clear and steady, devoid of the earlier urgency, now brimming with an undeniable authority. The sound of her voice, calm yet formidable, was a lifeline to Eleanor, a beacon of truth slicing through the darkness. Genevieve flinched, her grip on the phone tightening. "Clara," she breathed, her voice a strangled whisper. "That's right, dear," Clara's voice replied, a hint of steel in her tone. "Now, I suggest you step away from Eleanor. Immediately. I know about the pills, Genevieve. I know about the Digitalis. And I've been watching you for weeks." Eleanor felt a surge of adrenaline, a dizzying rush of vindication and terror. It was all true. The pills, the poison, the malice. Genevieve's hand, still clutching Eleanor's phone, began to tremble visibly. "You can't prove anything," she asserted, her voice wavering, a desperate attempt to regain control. Clara's laugh, a dry, humorless sound, crackled through the phone's speaker. "Oh, Genevieve. I think you'll find I can prove a great deal. I have photos of you switching Arthur's pills. I have video of you adding Digitalis to his coffee. And more importantly, my dear, I have a very detailed recording of the entire conversation you just had with Eleanor." Eleanor gasped, a sharp, choked sound. The recording. The entire confession, laid bare for the world to hear. She stared at Genevieve, whose face had gone from ashen to a ghastly shade of green. The elaborate plot, the casual cruelty, the cold-blooded admission of guilt, all captured, all undeniable. "What?" Genevieve whispered, her eyes darting frantically from the phone to Eleanor, a look of utter betrayal on her face. "What are you talking about? A recording? Check Eleanor's phone, Genevieve," Clara instructed, her voice calm and precise, like a surgeon directing an assistant. "Check her installed applications. Now." Genevieve's fingers, shaking violently, scrolled through Eleanor's phone, her eyes frantically scanning the screen. Her breath hitched, her face contorted in a mask of dawning horror, a realization so profound it seemed to steal the air from her lungs. You installed a recording app on her phone," she stammered, the words barely intelligible. "And much more," Clara interjected, her voice chillingly efficient. "GPS tracking, remote camera and microphone access, all backed up to a secure cloud server. You see, Genevieve, I've been documenting your every move, your every word, for weeks now. From the moment Arthur first called me." Eleanor, still reeling from the shock of the confession, the Digitalis, and now this intricate surveillance, interjected. "But I don't know you, Clara. I've never met you." Clara's voice softened, a hint of melancholy in her tone. "Eleanor, I worked as Arthur's secretary for 15 years until I retired and moved to Florida." Clara Evans. The name hit Eleanor like a bolt of lightning. Clara Evans. Of course! Arthur's fiercely loyal, impeccably efficient secretary. The woman who ran his office with military precision. She remembered a quiet farewell lunch, a promise to keep in touch that had, sadly, faded over the years. But Clara, in Florida, working against Genevieve? "Arthur called me 2 months ago," Clara continued, her voice regaining its steel edge. "He was worried, Eleanor. He had noticed things. Little changes in his routine. Inconsistencies, he felt. A chill from Genevieve, he said. And he was deeply suspicious of his medication. He asked me to keep an eye on things, to look out for you both. He suspected something was amiss, but couldn't quite put his finger on it. So I suggested he give me access to his home network, install a few discrete apps on your phone, just in case." He was hesitant at first, but his instinct, bless his heart, told him it was necessary. He never suspected it would come to this. A guttural sob laugh tore from Genevieve's throat, a sound of utter despair and bitter irony. "He knew!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "The old fool knew!" "He did," Clara confirmed, her voice now cold and merciless. "And he made sure you wouldn't profit from your greed, Genevieve. 3 weeks before he died, Arthur changed his will. There's a clause, quite specific, that states if he or Eleanor were to die under suspicious circumstances, or if their deaths were found to be anything other than natural, all assets, every last penny, would be immediately transferred to a series of specific charities. The Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, the local animal shelter. Genevieve, even if you had succeeded, you wouldn't have gotten a penny. Genevieve stood frozen, the phone still clutched in her hand, her eyes wide and vacant as Clara's words sank in. Arthur had known. Arthur had ensured her meticulous, weeks-long scheme for wealth was utterly, irrevocably futile. The will, the charities. Not a penny. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, stripping away every last shred of her calculated composure. A guttural, primal wail of pure, unadulterated rage and frustration erupted from her, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the quiet kitchen. All of this? For nothing? She shrieked, her voice hoarse, raw with despair. With a sudden, violent movement, she hurled the poisoned tea mug Eleanor had refused to drink against the brightly tiled kitchen wall. Ceramic shattered with an explosive crash, bits of porcelain and splashes of tea spraying across the pristine surface. Months of planning, months of watching that old man die slowly, she screamed, her hands clenching into fists, her body trembling with uncontrolled fury. And for what? For nothing. Eleanor instinctively pressed herself back against the hard wooden chair, her own terror momentarily overshadowed by the shock of Genevieve's complete, terrifying loss of control. This wasn't the composed, manipulative woman she had confronted. This was a cornered animal, dangerous and unpredictable. Through the broken speaker of Eleanor's phone, which Genevieve still held, Clara's calm, measured voice cut through the chaos, a lifeline of reason in the storm. Genevieve, the police are already on their way. You need to stop this now. Think about what you're doing. Genevieve let out a chilling, maniacal laugh, a sound devoid of humor, laced instead with bitter irony. The police? She cackled, pacing erratically around the shattered mug on the floor, oblivious to the ceramic shards. My husband, Benjamin, thinks I'm a successful real estate agent, Clara. He thinks we're comfortable. He has no idea we're drowning, suffocating under a mountain of debt. He thinks I'm his beautiful, clever wife who keeps up appearances. Her voice rose to a fever pitch. I can't go to prison. I'll lose Benjamin. He'll despise me. He'll see me for the lying, manipulative failure I really am. You don't have to lose him, Genevieve, Clara urged, her voice unwavering. You can surrender peacefully. You can get a lawyer. It's not too late to tell the truth, to try and mitigate the damage. But Genevieve was beyond reason, beyond the promise of mitigation. Her eyes, wild and unfocused, landed on the phone in her hand. With another scream of frustration, she swung her arm back and threw Eleanor's phone with incredible force against the opposite wall. It exploded into pieces, the battery flying free, the screen cracking into a spiderweb of irreparable damage. The call, and Clara's voice, abruptly ended, plunging the kitchen into a sudden, deafening silence, broken only by Genevieve's heavy, ragged breathing. The quiet was more terrifying than the screams. Genevieve stood amidst the debris, chest heaving, her eyes now locking onto Eleanor with a chilling, malevolent intent. But you? She said, her voice low and venomous, a stark contrast to her earlier hysteria. You're still here. And if I'm going down, I'm not going down alone. Eleanor's blood ran cold. The implication was clear, horrifying. Genevieve had lost her inheritance, her future, her carefully constructed facade, and now, she wanted to ensure there were no witnesses, no one left to revel in her spectacular downfall. Genevieve took a slow, deliberate step towards the large kitchen drawer where Arthur kept his cooking utensils. Not for Digitalis, Eleanor realized with a fresh wave of horror. This was no longer about a silent, undetectable poison. This was about raw, brutal violence. Genevieve pulled open the drawer and retrieved a long, gleaming object. Arthur's large, heavy carving knife, its sharp edge glinting wickedly in the overhead light. Eleanor's mind raced, desperately trying to find a way, any way, to appeal to the last shred of humanity that might still reside within her daughter-in-law. Genevieve, please, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Think about Benjamin. How will he feel? He'll be devastated. He'll lose both of us. Genevieve snorted, a harsh, dismissive sound. She held the knife with unsettling familiarity, its point aimed casually at Eleanor. Benjamin? Benjamin will grieve, of course. For a while. But Benjamin is resilient. He'll move on. He'll find someone new. Someone who isn't a lying, manipulative failure like me. Her eyes burned with a self-loathing that quickly morphed back into cold fury, directed squarely at Eleanor. With a predatory glint in her eye, Genevieve began to close the distance between them, the carving knife held aloft. No, she said, her voice hardening. Arthur's precious wife doesn't get to live happily ever after. You won't get to tell your story. You won't get to mourn him alone, knowing the truth. We're going together, Eleanor. You and I. The carving knife, glinting under the kitchen lights, arced upwards. Genevieve's eyes wild with homicidal intent. Eleanor's breath hitched, a silent scream trapped in her throat. She braced herself, her frail body feeling impossibly vulnerable against the sharp steel. But then, as Genevieve's arm reached its apex, Eleanor's gaze flickered downward, landing on the shattered pieces of the tea mug scattered across the linoleum floor near her feet. A single, larger shard, with a jagged, pointed edge, lay glistening menacingly. Instinct, raw and primal, surged through Eleanor. With a sudden burst of energy she didn't know she possessed, she stooped, her arthritic fingers closing around the ceramic fragment. Before Genevieve could complete her downward strike, Eleanor lunged forward, not towards the door, but at her attacker, and hurled the shard with all her might. It spun through the air, a deadly projectile, and struck Genevieve squarely above her left eye. There was a sickening thud, followed by a sharp cry of pain. A crimson line immediately bloomed on Genevieve's forehead, a deep gash from which blood began to well and trickle down her temple. Genevieve screamed, a high-pitched shriek of surprise and agony. Her eyes, wide with pain and fury, momentarily lost their focus. She stumbled backward, clutching her injured face, the carving knife clattering to the floor with a metallic clang. This was it. This was her chance. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She scrambled away from the reeling Genevieve, her gaze fixed on the back door. Her arthritic fingers fumbled frantically with the deadbolt, the cold metal resisting her desperate attempts. Behind her, she heard Genevieve cursing, a guttural growl of rage, followed by the distinctive sound of scrambling and scraping on the floor. Genevieve was searching for the fallen knife. Panic spurred Eleanor's fingers, finally catching the mechanism. The deadbolt clicked open with a shuddering groan. She yanked the door open, bursting out into the cold October night, barefoot, the chill of the damp grass instantly biting at her soles. "You're not getting away from me!" Genevieve's voice, raw with renewed fury, sliced through the night air, closer than Eleanor expected. Eleanor didn't look back. She ran, her 65-year-old legs pumping with a strength born of pure terror, across her manicured lawn, through the gap in the hedge, and straight towards the warm glow of her neighbors, the Wilkinsons' living room window. She pounded on their front door, her fists hammering against the solid wood, her voice raw and hoarse from screaming. "Help me, please! Someone's trying to kill me!" The sound of Genevieve's heavy footsteps gaining on her echoed in her ears, each thud a terrifying reminder of the danger lurking just behind. The front porch light flickered on, and a moment later, Mr. Wilkinson, a portly man in a rumpled bathrobe, his hair askew, peered out, his face a mask of disheveled alarm. Eleanor didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed past him, her body shaking uncontrollably, stumbling into the safety of their brightly lit living room. "Call 911!" she gasped, collapsing onto their plush carpet, her chest heaving, her lungs burning. "Please, Mr. Wilkinson, call them. She's still out there." Mrs. Wilkinson, a kind-faced woman with a worried expression, appeared from the kitchen, already reaching for the cordless phone on the wall. "Eleanor. What on earth? She poisoned my husband." Eleanor choked out, tears streaming down her face, the words tumbling over each other. "And now she's trying to kill me too. It's Genevieve. Mr. Wilkinson, though still bewildered, moved with surprising speed. He slammed the front door shut, twisting the deadbolt, his eyes darting through the peephole. "I see someone," he muttered, his voice tight with concern. "In your yard, Eleanor. She has something in her hand. A knife, I think." The receiver of the phone was already pressed to Mrs. Wilkinson's ear, her voice surprisingly steady as she recounted the terrifying scene to the dispatcher. Suddenly, a new sound ripped through the night, a primal, guttural scream, amplified by the stillness, reverberating through the thin walls of the Wilkinsons' home. It was Genevieve's voice, raw with unhinged fury, much closer now, right outside Eleanor's home. "Eleanor, get out here!" she shrieked, her words laced with a terrifying promise. "I'll burn this whole neighborhood down if I have to. You hear me? Come out, or everyone pays!" Eleanor sat huddled on the Wilkinsons' sofa, a thick, quilted blanket wrapped tightly around her shivering frame, though the cold she felt was deep in her bones, not just from the biting night air. Mrs. Wilkinson, remarkably composed, spoke in calm, measured tones into the phone, relaying the terrifying events to the 911 dispatcher. The wailing screams from outside had abruptly ceased, leaving a silence that felt even more terrifying, a pregnant pause before the inevitable. Then, faint at first, the unmistakable wail of sirens pierced the night, growing louder with each passing second. Red and blue lights began to flash through the Wilkinsons' living room windows, painting the familiar space in an unsettling kaleidoscope of color. 2 police cars, their sirens now muted, pulled into Eleanor's driveway, lights still flashing, bathing the front of her house in an eerie glow. Through the window, Eleanor saw them. Genevieve stood in the middle of her front lawn, bathed in the flashing lights, motionless. The carving knife lay on the grass beside her, glinting dully. Her head was bowed, her blonde hair disheveled, the blood from the gash above her eye stark against her pale skin. She looked like a broken doll, utterly defeated. All the fire and fury drained from her. 2 uniformed officers approached her cautiously, their hands hovering near their weapons. Genevieve offered no resistance, no fight. She simply stood there, a broken figure, as they carefully cuffed her hands behind her back. A few minutes later, a gentle knock came at the Wilkinsons' door. Officer Ramirez, a kind-faced woman with a reassuring smile, stood on the porch. "Mrs. Vance? Genevieve is in custody. We need you to come to the station to give a full statement, if you're up to it." Eleanor, her feet still throbbing from the run, now bandaged and in borrowed slippers, found herself sitting in a sterile interview room at the police station. She recounted the entire horrifying saga to Detective Miller, a sharp-eyed, serious man whose expression remained impassive throughout her emotional confession. The detective listened patiently, occasionally scribbling notes, allowing Eleanor to recount every detail, from the anonymous calls to the carving knife. When Eleanor finished, Detective Miller nodded slowly. "We've secured the scene at your home, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice low and grave. "Our forensics team found the Digitalis, exactly where you described, hidden in Genevieve's purse. We also found the powdered lactose in Arthur's pill organizer. And," he paused, his gaze hardening slightly, "we found something else. A journal. Hidden in Genevieve's bedside table." Eleanor felt a fresh wave of nausea wash over her. "A journal?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Detective Miller confirmed, pushing a hand through his hair. "It's comprehensive. Detailed entries for the past 6 weeks, Mrs. Vance, documenting Arthur's symptoms, the dosages she administered, the timeline of his decline. Every day, a careful notation of how her husband was slowly fading away." Eleanor felt the bile rise in her throat. The image of Genevieve, calmly, meticulously recording Arthur's suffering, like a twisted scientist documenting an experiment, was more horrifying than anything she could have imagined. Her Arthur, her kind, gentle Arthur, dying slowly, while his murderer meticulously tracked his demise. It was monstrous. "There's something else you need to know, Mrs. Vance," Detective Miller continued, his gaze softening slightly, as if sensing the depths of her distress. About Clara Evans. We located her residence. It's only about 10 miles from here. She's been living there for the past 2 months, watching your house, gathering evidence, installing the surveillance software on your phone, and a few other devices in your home. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Clara had been watching them? For 2 months? A chilling thought took root. Was Clara a stalker? Was she as dangerous as Genevieve, simply for different reasons? Detective Miller seemed to read her thoughts. I can see that's alarming, Mrs. Vance. But you need to understand the full context. Arthur didn't call Clara because he suspected Genevieve. Not initially, anyway. He called her because he was worried about you. Eleanor frowned, confused. Me? But why? He believed you were developing dementia, Mrs. Vance, the detective said gently. He slid a printed document across the table. It was a transcript. This is from the initial phone call Arthur made to Clara, which she recorded. He expressed deep concern about your recent forgetfulness, your confusion, your bouts of disorientation. He thought you were losing your memory, that you were succumbing to age. He was desperate. He asked Clara, his most trusted confidant, to look out for you, to keep an eye on things, to make sure you were safe. Eleanor stared at the transcript, the words blurring before her eyes. My forgetfulness, my confusion, my disorientation. It wasn't dementia. It was Genevieve. She had been slowly poisoning her too, just as she had poisoned Arthur, but differently, subtly, making her seem forgetful, making her seem frail, vulnerable. Arthur hadn't been trying to protect himself from Genevieve. He had been trying to protect Eleanor, believing she was fading away, completely unaware that his own life was being systematically stolen from him. The depth of Arthur's love, his unwavering concern for her, even in his own compromised state, brought a fresh wave of tears to Eleanor's eyes. Clara, Detective Miller explained, being a sharp woman and privy to many of Arthur's business dealings, quickly noticed inconsistencies. Genevieve's late-night visits to your house when Arthur was supposedly asleep, the vials she occasionally saw in Genevieve's car, the hidden spare keys. She started documenting everything, and very quickly, she caught Genevieve in the act of switching the pills. That's when her focus shifted. She chose the mysterious calls to you, Mrs. Vance, to warn you without giving away her surveillance to Genevieve, who she suspected might be monitoring communications. Wrapped in the comfort of a borrowed blanket, the terrifying ordeal began to recede, replaced by a dawning realization of just how close Eleanor had come to death. Saved. By Clara, an unseen guardian angel whose vigilance had been Arthur's last, desperate plea. The enormity of it all was overwhelming, a testament to the quiet strength of loyalty that transcended distance and time. Detective Miller's voice, though professional, carried a note of grim satisfaction as he outlined the charges. Genevieve will be charged with first-degree murder in the death of Arthur Vance and attempted murder of Eleanor Vance. With Clara Evans' meticulous evidence, the photos, the videos, the recorded confession, along with the physical evidence from your home, the case against her is incredibly strong. She'll be facing a very long time behind bars. Benjamin was called. The news shattered him. Eleanor heard his choked sobs through the phone, felt the raw, visceral pain of a son grappling with the unimaginable. He had no idea, no inkling of his wife's monstrous deception, or that his beloved father's death had been a cold-blooded murder. Eleanor couldn't begin to imagine the depth of his heartbreak, the betrayal. When he finally spoke to Eleanor, his voice was broken, filled with self-reproach. He apologized profusely, feeling responsible, feeling guilty for not seeing the signs, for trusting his wife. Eleanor, despite her own trauma, found herself comforting him, reassuring him that no one could have possibly seen through such a calculated facade. Detective Miller then revealed another layer of Arthur's foresight. We've also reviewed Arthur's will in detail. Mrs. Vance, as Clara mentioned, there was indeed a clause. If he or you died under suspicious circumstances within 5 years of the will being drafted, the bulk of his assets would go to charity. That was his way of ensuring Genevieve gained nothing from foul play. He paused, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips, But Arthur also created a separate, irrevocable trust for you, Eleanor. Specifically for your comfort and security. It ensures your financial stability for the rest of your life, regardless of any other conditions in the will. It was set up with full access and control for you, his wife, should anything happen to him, or should you be unable to manage your own affairs. Tears, hot and stinging, streamed down Eleanor's face, a torrent of grief and overwhelming love. Arthur, even when he thought she was losing her mind, he had protected her, made sure she would be safe, cared for. His unwavering devotion, his quiet strength, resonated deeply within her soul. He had loved her so fiercely, so completely. Genevieve, it seems, Detective Miller continued, had a very long game in mind. We found evidence that she began cultivating foxglove plants almost a year ago. She was meticulous, patient, and utterly ruthless in her planning. The thought of such calculated malice, festering for so long, sent a fresh shiver down Eleanor's spine. Later that night, as she looked at her home, now a crime scene, tainted by the horrors that had unfolded within its walls, Eleanor knew she couldn't return. The memories, both loving and horrifying, were too potent, too entwined. It was time for a new beginning. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in her new, smaller apartment, bathed in the gentle morning light. It was part of a secure, vibrant senior living community, only 20 minutes from Benjamin. Her life, though irrevocably changed, had begun to rebuild. The phone rang. A familiar chime. It was Benjamin. "Mother," he said, his voice stronger now, though still carrying a touch of sadness. Are you sure you want to be there?" Eleanor paused, looking out at the landscaped grounds, a sense of quiet determination settling over her. "Yes, Benjamin. I do. I need to be there. For Arthur. For me." Their shared grief had, paradoxically, forged an unbreakable bond between them. They had spent countless hours talking, healing, united by their love for Arthur and their determination to honor his memory by living fully, honestly. Benjamin, after months of therapy and soul-searching, was finding his way back to happiness. He was now engaged to Jennifer, a kind, gentle kindergarten teacher who brought a lightness and warmth into his life. Eleanor had met her and approved wholeheartedly. A few days later, a letter arrived, forwarded from her old address. It was from Clara Evans. Clara explained that she had moved back to Florida, finding solace in the sunshine and the quiet anonymity. But she wanted Eleanor to know that watching over her had not been a burden. It had been Arthur's last request, a sacred duty. She had enclosed a few trial clippings, summarizing Genevieve's swift conviction, and copies of the damning evidence. Eleanor, now strong, self-reliant, and surprisingly resilient, folded the letter and placed it carefully on her desk. She walked over to her computer, a new habit she'd cultivated, and began researching flights. Not to Florida, not to visit the past, but to new horizons. Dublin. A week-long tour of the Emerald Isle. She smiled, a genuine, joyful smile that reached her eyes. Arthur had always wanted to see Ireland. She would go for both of them. She was free. Her spirit, though tested, was unbroken. And life, vibrant and full of possibility, stretched out before her.